Welcome to the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast. Today we're chatting about when is too early to start studying for the bar exam. Your Bar Exam Toolbox hosts are Alison Monahan and Lee Burgess. That's me. We're here to demystify the bar exam experience so you can study effectively, stay sane, and hopefully pass and move on with your life. We're the co-creators of the Law School Toolbox, the Bar Exam Toolbox, and the career-related website Career Dicta. Alison also runs the Girls Guide to Law School. If you enjoy the show, please leave a review on your favorite listening app and check out our sister podcast, the Law School Toolbox Podcast. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out to us. You can reach us via the contact form on barexamtoolbox.com, and we'd love to hear from you. And with that, let's get started.
Welcome back. Well, as bar results continue their downward slide, more and more people are considering starting early. So we are actually been getting a lot of questions about when is too early to start studying for the bar. So we're going to talk about that today.
Yeah.
Lee, what do you think?
Well, I think there are a lot of different folks who are considering this. We hear from people who are thinking about studying during their last year of law school, or even people who are studying for a long period of time post-graduation, 6 months or even 18 months, especially repeat takers. So what I wanted to do today was to discuss things to consider when studying early, who's a good candidate to study early, and when this makes sense.
So before we jump in, if we're saying early, there must be some standard time frame. So what is the standard time frame for people to study in?
So most people study for 8 to 10 weeks if you're studying full time. If you're taking a big commercial bar review course, that typically starts, if you're taking the July bar, around the end of May. If you're taking the February bar, usually right after the holidays, either the last week of December or the first week of January, depending on when the bar is this year. So it really depends, but most people study for 8 to 10 weeks full time, unless there's a special circumstance.
Yeah. And so early might mean that you study, instead of say 2 months-ish, say 4 months if you're working and studying, because you're only going to have part of your time, that kind of thing. But it also could just mean you start early and you need more time.
Yeah.
So I guess there are two versions of early I think of. One is that you take the number of hours that you would have in that 8 to 10 week full-time period and you spread those out. Mm-hmm. And then, so of course it's going to take you longer, even though because you're doing fewer hours per day, but you might end up with the same overall amount of study time.
Right.
And then there are people who just need actually more study time.
Right. So I think let's talk about who might consider doing one of these kind of earlier start plans. So if you have struggled academically in law school, and maybe you're currently in law school, I think you should consider starting your bar prep during law school and not waiting until graduation for those 8 to 10 weeks to study just full time.
Yeah, I mean, that seems pretty unlikely to go well, let's be honest.
Yeah, because there are, possibly some underlying study concerns that need to be sussed out, and it's better to suss those out before you are just trying to frantically learn the law. Also, if you have not performed well in those core 1L classes, that's what's tested on the bar.
Right. So if you're someone who struggled through your first year, you always had some writing issues, maybe you never quite felt like it clicked for you in those timed exams, but you did better your second and third year because you started taking different types of classes, that's a pretty big red flag for failing the bar.
Yep. So I think another kind of category of student that would want to consider studying early, or in this idea that you may need more time than just the standard 8 to 10 weeks, is if you may have learning differences. So maybe you typically use extended time on exams, or you may have another disability like an injury or a medical condition that makes it harder to study in one spot for longer periods of time. That's going to make that 8 to 10 week period not feel long enough. Because if you think about it, if you are, let's say, going to get extended time on the exam, the study schedules written by the commercial providers are giving you standard amounts of practice time.
Right. But you're going to need more time.
But you're going to need
twice
time and a half. You're going to need time and a half.
Yeah, if you're getting time and a half to take the exam,
you probably need time and a half to study.
At least.
Yeah. So, and that's fine. That's not a judgment against you. That doesn't mean that you're not as smart as everybody else. But this idea that you're going to be able to perform in the study program of the person sitting next to you who maybe does not need that extended time, that is probably not a wise decision to make. So there are things that you could do if you're in law school to set yourself up to be able to best use those final months. But if you have failed, this is something you really want to consider when getting ready to study again, because it might be, depending on when your jurisdiction tells you about that failure, that the next, couple months that you get to study, depending on your jurisdiction, isn't going to be enough. And maybe you have to delay and not take the next administration of the test.
Yeah. I mean, I think this is just kind of basic math. Like if you only have 2 months to study and you're getting time and a half, well, it's probably going to take you more than 2 months to study. So you probably need to put that off and not take the next exam.
Yeah. Another category of folks who I think might need more time to study, who might want to start studying early, are foreign trained lawyers.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
For sure.
And these are even people who've done an LLM.
Yeah. And we've got an episode on just foreign trained lawyers that we'll link to in the show notes. But one of the realities here is that you have to actually learn a lot more.
Right. And it's, again, like no judgment. We're not saying foreign trained lawyers are not smart or whatever it is. It's just a reality that you haven't studied a vast majority of the material that's going to be on here. So, of course, you're going to need more time than someone who's already studied this.
Right. I worked with a team of lawyers from the UK who were in-house counsel. They were incredibly impressive people, but they were sending me questions about con law because they're like, the Commerce Clause? What?
Yeah, our constitution, our country doesn't have this constitution, so we have literally no idea what this is even referring to. And of course, anyone who's taken con law in law school is like, yeah, of course, the Commerce Clause is very basic.
Right. And I think one of the challenging things about studying the law without having gone to law school is one of the things that makes law make sense oftentimes is the public policy behind that law. And that is somewhat what is taught in some of these classes. And so if you haven't taken these classes and you're just reading outlines, certain subject areas or the way that the law is implemented might not make sense if you don't understand the policy behind it.
Right. And also just the reality that you haven't written a lot of time pressure exams on these topics means, of course, you're going to need more time to feel comfortable with that.
Right. Not to mention IRAC.
Right. And I mean, the way that law is written in a lot of places is very different.
Yeah.
Even if, obviously if you're coming from a civil law tradition, that's going to be very, very different. But even the common law, the difference in writing an exam, we sometimes get questions from people in the UK who are like, can you help me? I'm like, I have no idea what they're looking for you to write down.
Canada? Yeah.
Canada's a little more similar, but yeah.
But still, it's a different system, different rules. Australia.
Yeah.
I realize I'm only picking English-speaking countries, but these are the questions we typically get.
Right, but the point is also, too, that even though these are very similar, they're also very different. Mm-hmm. They're coming from the same basic legal traditions, but the way that people are expecting you to write an exam may have nothing to do with it. I would have literally no idea what a law school in Australia would want me to write down.
Did you learn much about the Mexican system when you lived down there?
No, I know it's a civil law system.
Okay.
That's pretty much the full extent of it.
I don't really know much about the Mexican system, even though we've worked with Mexican trained lawyers.
Yeah, but they were, trying to pass the California bar, so that's different.
So we didn't spend a lot of time talking to them about their Mexican law license.
Right.
So for foreign trained lawyers, I think the big challenge can be deciding to take off work and how much time you might need to study. And I think that what I would typically recommend if you're trying to minimize the amount of time that you take off work to study full time, that you can do part-time study over a longer period of time to try and get more comfortable with the law. So when you kick it into high gear, you're not playing as much catch up.
Right. And New York is one of those jurisdictions where a ton of foreign trained lawyers sit because they basically let them. And so I remember the summer, we had someone, I think, from the Netherlands who was living with us who had done an LLM. And she was doing the 2-month kind of crash course. But the reality is, again, these are very smart, accomplished people in their home countries who then at that point had done an LLM of 1 year at Columbia. And still the pass rate is abysmal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's just, it makes sense. It's like you can't learn that much material and how to present it in 2 months very easily.
Right. And then the additional challenge with foreign trained attorneys is if you are coming from a country where English is not your first language, taking timed exams that include a heavy writing portion in English
and reading performance tests.
Yeah, it's a lot. No matter, even for people who are used to conducting business in English, they say it's really quite a challenge.
Yeah, so I think a lot of foreign trained attorneys are going to need extra time, and sometimes because they are coming from very accomplished backgrounds, have an unrealistic idea about what's going to be required to pass.
Yeah. All right. Our last group of folks who probably want to consider studying early are people who are working and studying. And this goes back to your idea that you were mentioning. Like if you are working and studying part-time, you need to study for probably 4 months to get the same hours that you would get studying for 2 months.
Right. And then I'd say you probably need to add on like, an extra month or something so that you're reviewing materials and things like that you're forgetting.
Yeah. I think the other challenge with working and studying is making sure that you're not just studying when you're exhausted. So if you are in that camp and you have especially a lot of life commitments, maybe you have family members you take care of, maybe you have volunteer things that you do on the weekends, you need to make sure that you have time that you can sit down and do work that actually has an impact and not just late at the night or like 4 a.m.
Yeah, I talked to somebody the other day who's working 9 to 9. And I was like, I really don't know how you're going to study for the bar exam, to be honest. Like if you're working 9 to 9, 5 days a week, you can't study during the week. That's not really an option.
Yeah.
And then on the weekend, do you really think you're going to spend, you can't spend, 10 hours a day on the weekends and then go back to work on Monday.
When you grocery shop, how are you going to feed yourself?
Yeah, so we recommend probably minimum of around 20 hours a week if you're studying part-time. I was like, the math on this, again, just does not work out. I don't think you should take the next exam.
Yep. So that person may be a candidate for even studying much longer, but still the question would be, when are they going to find that high value study time?
Yeah. If you're working that much, it's very difficult.
Yeah. So when you're thinking about making a study plan that is going to have you studying, for a longer period of time, there are a lot of things that you want to consider. So I just mentioned it with the working and studying, but when you're figuring out when you can do this extra work, you want to make sure that you are spending time that is high value. So I think this is a big deal too for law students who are considering to study a little bit early. This isn't throwaway time. Like this is serious stuff. You should carve out, 1 day on the weekend or half a day, multiple days, 1 day during the week, half a day on the weekend. But you want to make sure that this time is built into your study calendar so you actually do it and you're very focused and you know what you want to work on.
Yeah, I think figuring out what to work on if you're kind of not on that standard schedule can be very difficult for people.
Yeah. Now, it's possible that your school might have some early bar prep stuff going on. I think schools are doing this more and more as the bar press rates go down. You can talk to your academic support department to see if they have any programs or if they'll do feedback on writing assignments for you. We have people who hire our tutors early to be able to do practice and get feedback, especially on things like the performance test. If you're taking or have taken a class at your law school on the bar and that didn't go particularly well, you may want to get some outside help to try and work on that and make the most of it. I think you want to just look at all the potential resources and realize that time put in early is going to be time saved later. And the part of the test, if you really have no idea where to start, then learn the performance test. Make sure you can pass that and get that done, because that is going to be something you don't have to waste time on as you get closer to the test.
Yeah, absolutely. The benefit of working on the performance test, which you can literally start as early as you want, basically.
Like any time. Like you could just pick one up tomorrow. You have all the skills necessary to take it tomorrow.
It's literally just sit down, read this packet of information, and answer the question that we've asked you to answer.
Yep.
And you don't have to memorize anything. It's not like doing one is going to carry over into the future. Mm-hmm. You just want to do them and make sure you're familiar with the different types that you might see. So we have in the Brainy Bar Bank tool, for example, we've got them all categorized. And so there are things like briefs and memos that are likely to show up. And then there are these crazy categories called the wild card categories. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you want to be sure that if you get something asking you, draft articles of incorporation, that you're not going to totally freak out about it.
Right. And we have our Writing of the Week program where we walk through examples of all of these different assignments. So if you really want some guided practice to do this, you could purchase our Writing of the Week program, which can be done on demand.
Yes.
And do one a week.
Yeah, and basically at that point, you're probably going to have done more performance tests than almost anyone who studied for the bar exam, because this is realistically an area that people ignore, and we see all the time people who fail because they did terribly on the performance test.
Yeah, and it's like the best part of the bar. You don't have to know any law.
It's really frustrating. Imagine that you've studied, you've done your MBE work, you did pretty well there, you did okay on your essays, and then you fail the bar because you do poorly on the performance test. And we see this actually a lot with foreign trained lawyers, circling back to that. And a lot of it's a timing issue, and you want to have a process. You want to make sure that you are able to complete this in the time that you have allocated to do it. And if you can't, it's going to be a problem.
Yeah.
But you can always start on this early.
Yep. The other thing that I think you can start on early is the multiple choice practice, because we love to talk about how you have to do a lot of practice. And if this is an area that you're really struggling, you can get started early. If you are scratching your head and wondering how you're going to get access to those questions, tools like Adaptabar usually are available to purchase right after the last bar exam. So if you are sitting for July, you could typically pay for the season of Adaptabar starting like March 1st.
Yeah, and they have like a fairly minimal one if you need to do it even earlier.
Yeah.
Like a little bit of extra money, they'll give it to you whenever you want.
Right. But I mean, if it was like March 1st, that's still like a long time to practice. So,
well, and there I think too, I mean, the spaced repetition is one of the things that really helps you memorize on things like that. So, if you start early, you might be thinking, oh, well, why don't I just forget everything by the end? But you're actually getting it deeper in your brain, because every time you see a similar type of question for the next, say, 4 to 6 months, your brain is remembering that.
Yeah. And one of the things that I think you can think about when you're working on, writing performance tests, doing any sort of essay practice or multiple choice practice, is you're not just reviewing the law, but you want to also be working on those exam skills. So like if you've had writing struggles in the past, if you're going to study early or for a longer period of time, you can always start by trying to fix writing problems.
Right. And that may be writing and then rewriting and getting feedback and rewriting again until you get the actual style of writing that you're looking for pretty dialed in.
Yep. And there could also be, time management type skills that you can work on. Like, what's your writing process? We call it our pre-writing approach. What do you do when you get the packet? Things like that. So you can really try and fix some of these ongoing problems that maybe plagued you in law school to make sure that they don't follow you to the bar exam.
Yeah, and I think this is a great place if you are in school to start with your academic support office. Go to them, say, look, based on my first year grades, I have concerns about how I'm going to perform on the bar. I would like someone to help me with this, and just see what they can offer you.
Yeah, absolutely. The reality is, putting your head in the sand and not working on this stuff doesn't make it any better.
No, definitely not. And I think too, sometimes people think, oh, well, I'll just forget everything, so there's no point in getting started. How am I going to learn the law? But you've got to be thinking too about learning the law and then documenting it in some way that's going to enable you to review and also memorize it. And so you can start that anytime. I mean, it doesn't matter. As long as you've created something you can go back to, you can start studying now. Yeah,
I think that's a really good point. And, we were talking recently about even taking some bar classes in your 3L year. If you're taking, evidence, if you're taking, what else do people take their third year? Wills and trust, community property, like all of that kind of stuff. If you're, if one of the classes that you're taking is an MBE class, I could see there being a lot of value in using MBE questions to help study for your final exam, because it's going to be drilling that law. Or you can use essay questions. Or if you are taking community property and your professor isn't using bar questions as part of your curriculum, well, you can download all of them for free on the California Bar, or use a tool like our Brainy Bar Bank, which will categorize them all for you and make it really easy to search and download them. But you can do all of this practice using the bar questions, and you're just starting to knock things out.
Yeah, exactly. And if you don't want to spring for Adaptabar, you can always go get something like Strategies and Tactics for the MBE. The Stephen Emanuel book is very popular. You can order it on Amazon. You can probably get a used version.
Yep.
Don't tell them I said that. But, the point is, this doesn't have to be like this enormous investment of time and money. It just, getting started sooner is going to reduce your stress later.
Yeah. So other things that I want you to think about when it comes to studying early is whether or not you have struggled with things like testing anxiety, struggling with getting accommodations.
Maybe you definitely want to start that early.
Right. Maybe you need to talk to your medical doctor because you are questioning whether your medication for your ADHD is working. I mean, all of this stuff shouldn't be dealt with during the bar prep period. So this is all stuff to be dealt with early. And, if you're going to have to invest time in this, like, it can take a long time to get a doctor's appointment.
Oh, yeah. And you don't want to be in a situation where you're not sure which exam you're going to be able to take or what your accommodations are going to be. Because we also get emails from people about that saying, well, I'm not sure if I should start studying because I haven't gotten approval to take the exam. And it's like, well, I don't really know what to tell you right now.
Right. Or they are studying and don't know if they get extended time. Right. In California, they will tell you sometimes as late as a week before the test whether or not you get extended time. So you're not even studying necessarily under the conditions in which you're going to be allowed to sit for the test. I mean, do not leave this stuff. So another way to kind of prepare early is to get all of your ducks in a row. If you have debilitating test anxiety and it has plagued you throughout law school, it is time to walk over to the mental health office at the university that you go to and knock on the door and try and find somebody who can help you with coping mechanisms for that, because that is not going to get better for the bar exam.
No, it's definitely not. And if you do have anxiety issues, I think also starting earlier and spreading things out sometimes can help with that, because if you just get thrown into this completely crazy 8 to 10 week time frame and suddenly, your anxiety is spiraling and you're not sleeping and you're getting really stressed out, that's just not helpful.
No.
It's definitely not going to help your on test day anxiety. And again, there are people who can help you with this. There are people who do coaching around this specifically for the bar and test anxiety, and you can Google all of this. But you got to get those people in place. And probably, I would suggest really starting to work with them even before you start your really intense prep period, so that you're not trying to, deal with both of these issues at once.
Yeah. And it's likely that stuff is plaguing you in law school anyway. So you can always start working on it and, test out your new coping mechanisms on your exams. So maybe your exams will go better. And then it's a win-win.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So you can use your, third year, particularly final semester, as a way to test out your bar approach.
Yeah. I think one of the big issues and pitfalls with studying early is burnout, which we see happening a lot. So this is especially true with people who want to study for 6 months, a year. Even recently, we got somebody messaging us who wants to study for 18 months. I haven't seen that go that well when it's that long, because one, it's such an 18 months, a year to 18 months is such an abstract amount of time.
Yeah, I feel like it's a balance here, because you need to have some degree of pressure to make sure you're actually going to do this.
Yeah. So I've seen 6 months work.
Yeah, I think 6 months works. Maybe even 8 months arguably for certain people, but I feel like once you get beyond that, 18 months, who can say anything at that point?
Yeah. I think that that's just a little bit long unless you have a very specific situation, and it's hard to stay focused for that time. So I've seen a lot of people who prepare for these longer periods of time, and it ends up happening in fits and starts. And so they get sick, and then it's 2 weeks, and then they pop back up, or then they get called out of town for a family thing.
Right. It's something always comes up, and there's always it's only 17 months away. I can still put this off for a little while longer. Whereas, you do want to have some sense of urgency about this, or it's going to be very difficult to make yourself do it. Plus, it's going to be really difficult to plan out a study schedule.
Yeah.
What do you even, I wouldn't even know where to start, really, other than start with a performance test for people who are studying for that long.
Yeah, for somebody who that long, they've probably been away from the law either for a long time, or that they're a foreign trained attorney. And so, you're going to have some sort of a plan to study the substantive law methodically. And then you're going to have to keep mixing it up, because you're just going to feel like you're doing the same stuff over and over again. That's going to be a lot. Yeah.
So I guess the answer to the question is sometimes it is too early to start studying.
It might be.
We can't tell you exactly where that point is, but we do think there is a point where it probably is counterproductive, and maybe you should just, take up skiing or something for a year.
And the other thing I think that can happen if you plan to study too early is life happens.
Right.
In 18 months, a whole lot of life can happen.
You might even find yourself wanting to take a different state bar exam by that point.
Yeah. Or I will also see people change jobs and then be in a job situation where they're not going to have time to study. So maybe, they had a job that was 8 to 5, and then they get one of those 9 to 9 jobs. Mm-hmm. And then how are you going to study? So you kind of have to look at these opportunities to sit. I also think that, sometimes people pick these really far off dates because they don't want to have to confront sitting for the test again.
Right.
It's just much, I hate to go to the dentist and the doctor. And so I always book my appointments multiple weeks in advance or like a month or two out. So I only have to decide to make the appointment, not decide to go. And then I can like make myself go later. It's a cute little game I play with myself to make things done.
I think that's why usually when I leave my dentist, they have me book 6 months from then, right then. They say, oh, well, we can always change it later, but let's just get it on the calendar.
Right, exactly.
And then they call you and you're like, oh, did I agree to that?
Yeah, you're like, man, I did. Yeah. So one of the things that you want to think about is, if it's like, oh, well, it seems safe because it's 6 months away. It seems safe because it's a year away. It seems safe because it's 18 months away. You really have to decide, is there a reason that you couldn't get prepared faster?
Right.
Is there a reason that, if you're getting married, which is something that comes up a lot, people are getting married or have some sort of life event and they're like, well, I'm going to study, but then I'm going to get married and then I might come back and study again. Then the question becomes, should you even be studying now?
Like, why bother?
Why bother? I mean, I think there's an argument to be made of like, go get a job and like make some money so you can study full time after your wedding.
Yeah, exactly.
And I've seen that work really well for people. Sometimes even more effectively than trying to study and work at the same times.
Yeah, no, I think that definitely can work. What do you think about people who sometimes come and they say, well, I just sat for the bar, but I'm pretty sure I failed. I want to start studying again early for the next one.
Well, depending on your jurisdiction and your individual situation, you might have to do this.
Yeah.
I mean, California and New York released their results so late that, so like for instance, in California, mid-May is when everyone will find out if they passed. And then you've just got to basically decide if you're going to study again right away.
Right.
So if you are someone, especially who needs extended time to prepare for the reasons we discussed, you may want to kind of hedge your bets. You may know what you probably bombed,
Yeah, I mean, my question, I talked to a number of these type of people who call this question, and my question to them is like, well, why do you think you failed?
Yeah.
And if somebody just says, well, I didn't feel that confident or whatever, but I was, I did really well in law school and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay, I think there's a pretty good chance you passed. Mm-hmm. Why don't you wait? Other people say, well, I didn't finish half of the essays or I didn't do a performance test. Like, okay.
I never got a passing MBE score on any of my practice.
Like, okay, I'm pretty sure you probably failed. Let's talk about what we can do now.
Yeah. And then you can also kind of decide what you're willing to take on. So sometimes if people had struggled with the performance test, that's what I'll say to do during kind of that off season is like, if you don't want to take on reviewing substantive law, like knock that part out. If that's something you only did one performance test before the exam, great, let's do some more.
Right. Go do 5 of them.
Right. So you can do that. But I don't think it's a terrible idea because some jurisdictions just don't give you enough time to study for some folks.
I think that's a good point. I think it depends a lot on when your results come out. And if you are in one of those later jurisdictions and you have a pretty good reason to think you probably failed, then okay, it's probably not the worst idea. I mean, maybe you waste a little bit of time and money and energy up front, but I mean, then you get happy news. So you should be happy.
Yeah. I mean, it can be tough. I think that for people who are working and studying too, you need to be practical. If you think you didn't pass and you're going to have to work and study for the next one, you may need to start studying before you get your results back.
Well, particularly if your job is going to depend on it.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of places will let you fail once, but very few places will let you fail twice and keep your job.
And when it comes to even like hiring help or using, a course or investing in Bar again or something to study early, some people will say like, I don't want to spend any more money. But if your job depends on it, a few $100 to get started early, yeah, maybe it's a gamble. But if that leads to you passing the next time and you're not losing your job, the opportunity cost is pretty clear.
I would say that's a pretty good decision on your part. So I think you just have to be, kind of realistically assess your chances. Don't be super paranoid about it. I mean, if there's a pretty good chance you passed, probably you did. Mm-hmm. But if there's a pretty good chance that you didn't, then odds are good you didn't.
Yeah. All right. Well, I think we are out of time. I want to take a second to remind everyone to check out our blog at barexamtoolbox.com, which is full of helpful tips to help you prepare and stay sane as you study for the bar exam. You can also find information on our website about our courses, tools, and one-on-one tutoring programs to support you as you study for the UBE or California bar exam. If you enjoyed this episode of the Bar Exam Toolbox podcast, please take a second to leave a review or rating on your favorite listening app. We'd really appreciate it. And be sure to subscribe so you don't miss anything. If you're still in law school, you might also like to check out our popular Law School Toolbox podcast as well. If you have any questions or comments, please don't hesitate to reach out to myself or Alison at lee@barexamtoolbox.com or allison@barexamtoolbox.com, or you can always contact us via our website contact form at barexamtoolbox.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk soon.